Good morning, students. Today you are going to talk with that is nerve impulse and the generation of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. Still on, we are already discussing about the introduction of the neural control and coordination and the human neural system, the division of the types of neural system, human neural system. The third class we already discussing, that is completed. That is the third class, the neural control and coordination, that is structure of neuron. The fourth, that is class, we already discussing of the types of neurons, the types of the neurons. In this class, it is the fifth class of the neural control and coordination. Today we are going to discussing about that is very important. We are going to talk something about generation of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. Generations of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. What is the fifth class? Generation of the nerve impulse. 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 Generation of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. 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 Today it is the generation of the nerve impulse. Generation of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. Generation of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. Before going this topic, generations of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. Generations of the nerve impulse and conduction of the nerve impulse. In our body, that is the nervous tissue. The nervous tissue consists of two types of the cells. What is the first type of cell? Excitable cells. Excitable cells means neurons. Non-excitable cells present inside the nervous tissue. The two types of the cells present in our body. What is the first type of cells? Excitable cells. What is the excitable cells? Neurons. The second, non-excitable cells. Non-excitable cells. Excitable cells means neurons. The neurons are excited. The neurons are respond whenever the neurons receive stimulus. For example, what is the meaning of stimulus? Stimulus means it is one important factor. For example, you are respond to any cold, you are respond to any hot, you are respond to any temperature, you are respond to any pH, or external factor, or internal factor, or physical factor, or biological factor, or chemical factor in our body is respond. In our body is respond to in our surroundings. The main reason is in our body consists of one important excitable cells. What is excitable cells? What is the excitable cells? The millions of the excitable cells present in our brain and spinal cord. Brain and spinal cord. What is the excitable cells? What is the excitable cells? The excitable cells. Excitable cells. Excitable cells. Excitable cells. Excitable cells means neurons. The excitable cells means neurons. The excitable cells means nerves. The excitable cells means nerves. Whenever the neurons receive any stimulus, any cold, for example, they receive any temperature, any hot object. Once we touch any hot object, outside the temperature is more, outside is more cold, and our bodies respond particular nature, particular surroundings. The main reason is in our body consists of millions of the neurons. These neurons are the excitable cells. Excitable means they will excite, they will respond, they receive the information. After they will travel the information, they will send the information throughout the body. After then they will respond. The neurons are the excitable cells. The neurons are the excitable cells. Do you know the neurons are the excitable cells? The neurons are the excitable cells. If you observe the neurons, 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 if you observe the if you observe the neurons, 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 if you observe the these neurons, if you observe the 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 neurons. For example, how these neurons are generated nerve impulse. They keep in your mind. What is the meaning of the generations of the nerve impulse? The generations of nerve impulse means ions are exchange. Ions are movement. Outside ions move into the inside the ions. If you observe the nerve cell, if you observe the nerve cell, if you observe the one nerve cell, if you observe the one nerve cell, the outside the cell, it is known as a extracellular fluid. The inside the cell, it is known as a intracellular fluid. Outside the cell, it is known as a extracellular fluid. Inside the cell, it is known as a intracellular fluid. This inside the cell, it is known as a exoplasma. Exoplasma. This membrane, it is known as a exoplasma. Exolemma. It is known as a exolemma. Okay, inside the cytoplasma of the axon. Cytoplasma of the axon. Cytoplasma of the axon, it is known as a exoplasma. Outside the membrane, outside the exolemma, it is known as a extracellular fluid. Extracellular fluid. If you observe the any cell, if you observe, for example, normal cell, it is a normal cell. Outside the cell, it is known as a extracellular fluid. Inside the cell, it is known as a intracellular fluid. This intracellular fluid means cytoplasma. Intracellular fluid means cytoplasma. If you observe it is a nerve cell. If you observe the nerve cell, it is nothing but axon. This entire part is known as a axon. Whenever these neurons are excited, these neurons receive stimuli. The neurons receive stimuli. Stimuli means some of the agents, cold, for example, heat, and also, for example, temperature, for example, pH, etc. Some important factors. Whenever more cold present in the outside, heat, temperature, pH present in the is more in the outside, this dendrite receive the stimuli. Dendrites receive the stimuli. Dendrites receive the stimuli. Whenever the dendrites receive the stimuli, this information pass into the cell body. The information pass into the cell body. The information pass into the cell body. The information pass into the cell body. Again, this information pass into the axon. The information pass into the axon. Whenever the axon receive information from the cell body receive information from the dendrites. This axon membrane is excited. This axon membrane means it is a axolemma. Axolemma means plasma membrane of the axon. Plasma membrane of the axon. This plasma membrane of the axon, it is consists of a number of the ion channels. It is consists of ion channels, different ion channels. This entire axolemma is consists of different types of ion channels, different types of ion channels. These ion channels are permeable to the ions. For example, outside the ions move into the inside the ions move into the outside. Whenever these ions move into the inside to the outside to the inside to the outside, they generate nerve impulse. Nerve impulse is nothing but exchange of ions. Outside the ions move into the inside the ion move into the outside. This entire connection, this ion movement, it is movement the entire axon. This information pass into the again synaptic node to the synapse. How this generation is impulse is possible? Because the nerve impulse means the ion movement. If you observe the axolemma means it is a plasma membrane of the axon. This axon is consists of number of different types of ion channels. These ion channels, they receive information. Whenever they receive information, the ions move into the outside to the inside to the outside. This ion move into the inside to the inside to the outside. They generate impulse. Coming to this excitable cells. Again, this nerve impulse, how the impulse are generated according to the nerve impulse. The nerve impulse means this nerve impulse. The nerve impulse, it is divided into three types. The nerve impulse is divided into three types. Based on our understanding. The first type of the nerve impulse is known as a resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential. What is the first one? Resting membrane potential. Coming to the second. What is the second one? Depolarization. What is the name? Depolarization. What is the second one? Depolarization. What is the third one? Impulse will say repolarization. What is the name? Repolarization. The nerve impulse is divided into based on in our convenience. It is divided into the three types. First one, resting membrane potential. Second one, depolarization. Third one, repolarization. Coming to the resting membrane potential. Name itself meaning is there. Resting membrane potential means the nerve fiber, the nerve cell. The nerve fiber means nerve cell. The neurons they are not connected, they are not generated, they are not received any signals. They are not respond any stimuli. They are not respond. They are not conduct. Resting membrane potential means they are not. They are not conduct. They are not conduct any impulse. They are not conduct any impulse. Resting membrane means the resting condition. Once the neuron is in resting condition, the resting position, they are not conduct, they are not generate any impulse. They are not generate any impulse. They are not receive any stimuli. They are not receive. They are not receive any stimuli. They are not receive any stimuli. During the resting membrane means the membrane, that is the axolemma, is the resting position. If you observe the resting position of the membrane, resting position of the membrane, the resting position of this membrane, the resting position of the membrane, the resting position of this membrane, the resting position of the membrane, the resting position of the membrane. If you observe the resting position of this membrane, the resting position of the membrane, the resting position of this membrane, the resting membrane potential. The resting membrane potential means outside the always, means extracellular fluid. What is an outside? The extracellular fluid. Extracellular fluid means outside always positive charge. What is the polarity of the membrane? What is the resting membrane potential? It is always the neuron. It is always maintain the polarity. Maintain the polarity. Outside always positive charge. Inside always maintain the negative charge. At the time during the resting condition, outside always positive charge. Inside always negative charge. This inside is nothing but intracellular fluid. The intracellular fluid always negative charge. Outside always positive charge. Outside always positive charge ions. Inside always negative charge ions. Inside always negative charge ions. Outside always to maintain by the sodium ions. Always maintained by the sodium ions. Inside always maintained by the negatively charged proteins. Negatively charged proteins. Negatively charged proteins. Negatively charged proteins. The generation of the nerve impulse, it is divided to based on in our convenience. It is divided into three types. First one, resting membrane potential. Second one, depolarization. Third one, repolarization. Resting membrane potential means the neurons, the nerve fibers are, the neurons or nerve cells are the resting position. Resting position. Resting position means they are not generate any impulse. They are not generate any impulse. They are not receive any stimuli. They are not receive any cold. They are not receive any temperature. They are not receive any physical or chemical or external or internal factors. Okay. Once we are observed, once we can observe that at the time of the resting membrane potential, at the time of the resting membrane, at the neurons are resting condition, outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. Outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. The inside the membrane, it is known as a intracellular fluid. Outside the membrane, it is known as a extracellular fluid. Outside the membrane is known as a extracellular fluid. If you observe the any cell, outside is nothing but extracellular fluid. Inside is nothing but intracellular fluid. That is a common point for the any cell. If you observe the nerve cell means outside is extracellular fluid, inside is intracellular fluid. Outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. Inside always negative charge. It is the resting membrane means it is always maintain the outside the pole. It is maintain the polarity. It maintain the polarity. It maintain the polarity. Outside the polarity. Outside the polarity. What is the outside the polarity? Outside polarity. Positive charge. Outside means positive charge. Positive charge is maintained by the sodium ions. Positive maintained by the sodium ions. Inside the negative charge. inside the negative charge, inside the negative charge. This negative charge is maintained by the negatively charged proteins, negatively charged proteins, negatively charged proteins, negatively charged proteins. If you observe the resting membrane potential, outside always positive means sodium ions, inside always negative ions. If you observe the resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential, the resting membrane, the neurons are resting membrane, outside always extra cellular fluid, outside always sodium concentration is more compared to the potassium concentration, sodium concentration is more compared to the potassium concentration here. Okay, if you observe the intracellular fluid, if you observe the inside this fluid, inside this membrane intracellular fluid, potassium concentration is more compared to the sodium, potassium concentration is more compared to the sodium. Okay, outside means extracellular fluid, inside means intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid means cytoplasm. If you observe the resting membrane potential, outside always sodium ion concentration is more compared to the potassium concentration. Okay, if you observe the inside intracellular fluid, potassium concentration is more compared to the sodium ion concentration, but here this negative charge is maintained by the, this negative charge inside negative charge is maintained by the negatively charged proteins, negatively charged proteins means sulfur containing proteins and phosphorus proteins, sulfur and phosphorus proteins, phosphorus proteins, sulfur contain and phosphorus protein. During the resting membrane potential, outside always sodium and concentration is more, but the inside is potassium is more compared to this outside sodium is more, it is the potassium is less. Inside intracellular fluid, potassium is more but the sodium is less. Okay, but here intracellular fluid, this negative charge is maintained by the negatively charged proteins, it is not maintained by the potassium. Outside it is maintained by the sodium, outside it is always maintained by the sodium. This positive charge is maintained by the sodium, outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. During the resting membrane potential, during the resting membrane potential means the membrane means the axon membrane, axolemma, no fiber or no cell or neurons are resting condition. Whenever they are in the resting condition, outside always positive charge, inside always maintain the negative charge. During the resting membrane potential, what is the polarity charges? What is the resting membrane potential? Minus 70 millivolts. What is it? Minus 70 millivolts. Minus 70 millivolts is maintained by the outside sodium ions, inside negatively charged proteins. This polarity of the charges, what is the resting membrane potential? Minus 70 millivolts. Minus 70 millivolts. During the resting membrane potential, more permeable to the potassium ions. 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 More permeable to the potassium ions move into the inside to the outside, but it is impermeable to the sodium ions. Impermeable to the impermeable to the sodium ions. Impermeable to the sodium ions. It is impermeable to the, more permeable to the potassium ions, impermeable to the sodium ions, and also impermeable to the negatively charged ions also. Impermeable to the negatively charged ions also. Impermeable to the negatively charged ions also. During the resting membrane potential, the membrane it is always resting condition. They are not receive any impulse. They are not conduct any impulse. They are not generate any impulse. Once they receive stimulus means they depolarized. Resting means the membrane is rest condition. The membrane is rest condition. Outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. This outside positive charge is maintained by the sodium ions. The inside the negative charge is maintained by the negatively charged ions. During the resting membrane potential, outside the polarity positive, inside the polarity is negative charge. It is both positive and negative is maintained by the potential. Minus 70 millivolts is maintained with sodium and potassium. Sodium and potassium. During the outside charge is sodium charge, inside charge is negative charge. Extracellular fluid outside the membrane is sodium ions are more compared to the potassium ion concentration. Inside intracellular fluid, potassium concentration is more compared to the sodium ion concentration. During the resting membrane potential, more permeable to the potassium ions inside to the outside, but the sodium ions impermeable to the outside to the inside, and also other condition, the negatively charged ions also impermeable to the inside to the outside, impermeable to the inside to the outside. During the resting membrane potential means the neurons or nerve fiber or the nerve cells are the neurons or the nerve fibers are during the resting condition. During the resting condition, it is a no fiber, it is a neurolemma. Neurolemma. Neurolemma means plasma membrane of the nerve cell. This plasma membrane of the nerve cell is consists of different types of ion channels. These ion channels are, it is suitable for the, it is a selective molecules. It is a permeable molecules. They receive the selective molecules. It is neurolemma. During the resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential. Resting membrane means outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge, outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. This negative charge is maintained by the negatively charged ion proteins. Positive charge is maintained by the sodium. It is nothing but negatively charged proteins. Outside positive charge, inside negative charge. It is maintained by outside the positive charge, inside the negative charge. It is always maintain the balance. It is with the help of this resting membrane. This consists of one important this membrane. Outer the membrane is consists of different types of ion channels, sodium channels, potassium channels, sodium potassium pump, and also voltage gated channels. Different ion channels are present. They are only selected for the molecules, movement of the molecules. It consists of sodium potassium pump. Sodium potassium pump. What is a pump? Sodium potassium pump. This sodium potassium pump to maintain the balance. During the resting condition, outer membrane is consist of leakage channels. Leakage channels means always sodium ions move into the outside to the inside. Here consists of leakage channels. What is the channels? Leakage channels means leakage sodium channels, potassium channels. Leakage sodium channels and potassium channels. Leakage channels means the sodium ions is a sodium always move. Here present potassium. The sodium ions move into the outside to the inside. Potassium move into the inside to the outside. Sodium is moved into the outside to the inside. The potassium move into the inside to the outside. Whenever the continuous moving, The continuous sodium ions move into the outside to the inside, potassium move into the inside to the outside. It is the imbalance of the ions, outside and inside. But here, this one is corrected by the outside always maintain the positive charge, inside always maintain the negative charge. It is maintained by the sodium-potassium pump. Sodium-potassium pump. It is maintained with the sodium-potassium pump. This sodium-potassium pump, it is activated at the time of the resting membrane potential. It is only open. It is only activated by the at the time of the resting membrane potential. Whenever the sodium-potassium pump is activated, what is the function of the sodium-potassium pump? 3 sodium ions move into the inside to the outside. 3 sodium ions move into the inside to the outside. 2 potassium ions move into the outside to the inside. Outside to the inside. What is the function of the sodium-potassium pump? What is the function of the sodium-potassium pump? What is the function of this sodium-potassium pump? What is the sodium-potassium pump? What is the function of sodium-potassium? It is a extracellular fluid. It is the intracellular fluid. It is extracellular fluid. It is intracellular fluid. This membrane is consist of leakage channel. Leakage channel means sodium-potassium leakage channels. The sodium ions move into the outside to the inside. Potassium move into the inside to the outside. Once they will continuously move into the outside to the inside, they move into the outside to the inside. For example, sodium move into the outside to the inside. For example, potassium move into the inside to the outside. Outside to the inside, inside to the outside. The continuous moving means the sodium move into the influx, potassium move into the efflux, means the sodium potassium, it is imbalance. This imbalance is corrected by the sodium potassium pump. One sodium potassium pump. This sodium potassium pump with the help of ATP, this sodium potassium channel. This sodium potassium channel, this sodium potassium means sodium potassium proteins. This protein, sodium potassium pump, they utilize ATP molecules with the help of energy. 3 sodium ions sent into the 3 sodium ions. They will send into the this sodium potassium pump. 3 sodium ions they will send into the 3 sodium ions are sent into the inside to the outside. Inside to the 3 sodium ions sent into the inside to outside. Inside to the outside. Intracellular fluid to the outside, extracellular fluid. Inside to the outside. 3 sodium ions. They will send into the 3 sodium ions move into the inside to the outside. 2 potassium ions. They will send into the outside to the inside. 2 potassium ions are outside to the inside. Outside to the inside. They will send into the outside to the inside. Whenever the 3 sodium ions move into the inside to the outside, 2 potassium ions move into the outside to the inside, they maintain the balance. This active transport, this passive transport, active transport means they can utilize the ATP molecules, these 3 sodium ions and 2 potassium ions, sodium-potassium pump to maintain the outside always positive charge. Inside always negative charge. Sodium-potassium pump is helpful for this pump only activated at the time of the membrane is resting condition. During the resting membrane, it is always outside always polarity always positive charge, inside always negative charge. Outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. It is maintained by the sodium potassium pump. These sodium ions are moved into the inside to the outside. 2 potassium ions are outside to the inside during the resting membrane potential. What are the conditions are happening to the resting membrane potential? It is the impermeable to the during the resting membrane potential. What is the first one? Resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential. resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential. Coming to the resting membrane potential means always positive charge present in the outside, negative charge inside. Always positive charge outside, inside negative charge during the resting membrane potential. Coming to the what is the second step of the depolarization? What is the meaning of depolarization? Depolarization means the polarity change. What is the meaning? Depolarization means polarity change. Polarity change. Whenever the polarity change, they will generate action potential. You know, action potential. Action potential generate. Action potential generate. Action potential generate. Polarity means once the, for example, if you observe the depolarization condition. If you observe the depolarization condition, what is this one? Axolemma. Axolemma. It is the entire axon membrane. Enter the axon membrane. The nerve impulse pass into the entire axon membrane. Once they receive stimulus. They receive stimulus. What is the outer side? Always positive charge. Outside always positive charge. Inside negative charge. Outside always positive charge. Inside always negative charge. It is nothing but intracellular fluid, extracellular fluid. The membrane, once the membrane receives stimulus, the stimulus it receives stimuli. It receives stimulus. Stimuli means the signals arrival. What is it? The signals arrival on the axolemma. Signals arrival on the axolemma. Whenever the signals are arrival in the axolemma, it consists of different types of channels. Different types of channels. It consists of different types of channels. It consists of positive charge, negative, positive, negative. This consists of plasma membrane consists of different types of channels. The axolemma, it receives stimulus. Whenever it receives the stimulus, the positive ions means sodium ions, the sodium voltage gated channels means sodium channels are open. Whenever the sodium channels are open, the sodium ions are move into the inside. The sodium ions are move into the inside. Whenever the sodium ions are move into the inside the charge is positive charge. The sodium ions are move into the influx of the sodium ions. Influx of the sodium ions. Influx of the sodium ions. Inside the positive charge means outside negative charge. Outside always negative charge. Inside always positive charge. Inside always positive charge. Outside negative charge. Means depolarization means once the neuron receives the stimulus, once the neuron receives any signal from the surroundings, this polarity is changed. Once the polarity change means the action is takes place. The action potential. Action means once the axon means once the dendrite receives the information, the dendrite pass into the cell body to the axon. Axon is means axolemma means axon membrane. Axon membrane means it is consists of different types of channels. Once they receive the stimulus, this outside normal condition, resting condition outside positive, inside negative. Once they receive the stimulus, this positive ions move into the inside, negative move into the outside. Positive move into the inside, negative move into the outside. Once the positive move into the inside means voltage gated channels are open at the time of the depolarization condition. Depolarization condition is a sodium channels open. Sodium channels open. Sodium channels are open means influx of the sodium ions. 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 Sodium ions are move into the inside. Once they move into the inside means inside always positive charge. It is the negative charge. This only takes place, it is the only first place of the axolemma. Of this one is polarized condition. It is not a depolarized. Depolarized means the polarity is changed once the neurons receive the stimulus. Once the neurons receive the stimulus, once the depolarization condition, after the depolarization condition, see once here, after the depolarization condition, after the depolarization condition, after the depolarization condition, see here, after the depolarization condition, how the impulses are generated, how the impulses are generated, how the impulses are generated after the depolarization. Okay, now depolarization, for example, it is indicate A axolemma, it is indicate B, it is indicate B. Okay, here depolarized, depolarized means sodium channels are open. Sodium channels are open means depolarized is the depolarized. What is it? Depolarized. It is the polarized. Polarized. Depolarized means outside negative charge. Outside negative charge. Inside positive charge. Inside positive charge. Intracellular fluid. It is the extracellular fluid. What is the reason? Sodium channels are depolarized means sodium channels open. Sodium channels open. Whenever the sodium channels are open, the sodium ions move into the influx. Sodium ions move into the inside. Whenever the sodium ions move inside, they always maintain positive charge. Outside, negative charge. Polarity is change. Polarity change means depolarization. Okay, polarized means outside always positive. Polarized means outside always positive, inside always negative. Polarized, polarized is not a depolarized. Positive, it is maintained inside negative intracellular fluid. It is the extracellular fluid. Outside positive charge. Outside positive charge. Outside positive charge. Outside negative, inside positive. Inside positive, inside positive, inside positive. Outside negative. It is the depolarized. It is the polarized. How the impulses are generated? How the impulses are generated? See here. It is the beacon. It is the A. It is the axolemma. Axolemma. How the impulses are generated? How the impulses are generated? How these ions are move into the one to the others. For example, it is nothing but current flow. It is nothing but current flow. See here, intracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid means the positive ions A to B. It is A. It is the B. A to B. This positive ions move into the A to B, inside to the same inside. See here, positive ions move into the inside to the inside, inside to the inside, intracellular fluid to the intracellular fluid. Okay, the B of the head. It is the B of the head. It is the B of the head. The positive ions go into the B to A. B to A. A to B. It is the B to A. It is the B to positive moves into the negative. Positive move into the negative. Positive move into the negative. Positive move into the negative. Okay, the ions move into the positive move into the next one. The positive move into the next one. Once the positive move into the next neurolemma, the positive means it is the positive move into the always positive. Positive means here always positive, 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 positive. Because of polarized condition means leaky channel. Leaky channels means here outside always negative, negative, negative. Outside always negative, negative, negative. Means it is the depolarized. This one is depolarized means this one repolarized. This one repolarized. See, positive move to the inside. Positive, 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 positive. Once the positive means outside means okay, here negative, 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 negative. Here always positive, 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 positive. Here negative, 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 negative. Means it is the depolarized condition. This one depolarized too. Again this one depolarized. Before this one repolarized. 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 Repolarized means outside positive charge. Outside positive charge. Here potassium channels are open. Potassium channels are open. Potassium channels are open. The impulse, the current flow into the one membrane to the nerve impulse. Nerve impulse means how the generations of the nerve impulse, how the conductions of the impulse from the one axon membrane, the starting axon membrane to the ending of the axon membrane. This action potential means generations of the nerve impulse, the continue to the entire axonema. Entire axonema. These ions move into the once the generation of the nerve impulse means three types. First one, resting membrane, outside positive, inside negative. Depolarization means the polarity change once they receive the stimulus. Once the depolarization means the polarity change means outside always negative, inside always positive. These positive ions move into this one. Move into the next one. It is this positive ions move to the next one. It is the repolarization. Repolarization. This one is again depolarized. Next one depolarized. Next one depolarized. Again the polarized. These ions are move into these ions are jump into the current flow into the A to B, B to A. How these ions are movement? How these ions are moving? Once they receive the stimulus, this impulse is passed into the entire membrane. Entire membrane. The entire membrane. The entire membrane. The entire membrane. Once the repolarized condition, see here, during the it is the during the first one it is known as the first one is known as resting membrane potential. What is it known? Resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential. See here, all of you listen once. Resting membrane potential. What is the resting membrane potential means? Positive, 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 negative, 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 positive, 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 negative, negative, negative. It is the resting membrane potential. Resting membrane potential. Once the resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential, resting membrane potential. Outside extracellular fluid, intracellular fluid. Resting membrane means outside positive, inside negative. Once they receive stimulus, for example, they receive stimulus. Okay, they receive stimulus. They receive stimulus. Receive stimuli. Receive signal. Receive signal. Once they receive signals means the sodium channels are open. The sodium channels are open means the sodium is moving to the outside to the outside extracellular fluid. It is intracellular fluid. Outside to the inside. Inside to the outside. Once the receive the signals means depolarized. Once they receive the signal means depolarized. Depolarized means outside negative, inside positive. It is the depolarized. Depolarized. What is the depolarized condition? Once the depolarized, outside, inside, depolarized. Once they receive the signal, outside negative, inside positive, that is a depolarized. Once the depolarized means these ions, how these ions are movement? It is the outside always negative charge, inside always positive charge, See here, these ions are movement. These ions are positive moving to the A. For example, it is the B. Positive moving to the negative charge attraction. The negative moving to the positive charge. Negative moving to the positive charge. For example, B. It is the A. A move into the B. B head move into the again A. This positive move into the negative. This positive move into the here means here also positive. Here means negative. Once the positive move into the means is a positive. Okay, here upside is the negative. Upside the B move into the outside negative. Inside positive. means B is again depolarized. Depolarized. Once the B is depolarized, again A is again repolarized. Repolarized. Inside negative. Inside negative. It is always again maintain the negative. Outside positive. Outside positive. Repolarized. Repolarized means it is maintained by the potassium ions. Repolarized maintained by the potassium ions. Potassium ions. It is the sodium ions lifespan is very short. Once the sodium ions is closed, potassium channels are open. Once the potassium channels are open means repolarized condition again. Outside no signals is arise. No signal means outside always positive charge, inside always negative charge. It is during the repolarization condition, outside potassium is maintained. Okay, outside positive charge is maintained by the potassium ions. During the depolarization means outside negative, inside positive. During the resting membrane potential, outside positive, inside negative. It is the generations how this impulsor jump into the A to B, B to A. Once the impulsor, it is a depolarized. Again, this one is repolarized. Again, next one is depolarized. Next one is depolarized. The impulsor pass into the entire membrane. The nerve impulsor nothing but it is the exchange of the ions, the flowing of the current. Thank you very much.